in this case, refugee camps. That can't be allowed. It's wrong. It goes against all the principles that the U.S. and Europe hold to, and most of the rest of the world. And I think we have an obligation to speak up and not just stand on the sidelines and mutely observe this without raising our voice. So that's why I appreciate the previous speaker, and I suspect subsequent speakers are going to say the same thing. I appreciate you having this panel, and more than happy to respond to any questions in terms of where the U.S. is, but it's disappointing so far.
Mr. Moran, thank you very much for your comments, and of course we can accept questions after everybody have finished their comments. And now we will give the floor to Mr. Malik Ben Ashur, member of the Senate of Belgium. Mr. Ben Ashur.
Well, thank you, Nader. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for your invitation, and sorry in advance for my English, which is not my mother language. I won't repeat what have been said just before, because I agree with, I would say, everything. What strikes me the most is that now the PA, Palestinian Authority, is developing the very same narrative towards Al Jazeera as the Israeli government did last May when it banned the channel. And this narrative was obviously developed in the context of the Israeli colonial war of aggression against Gaza. And on the PA side, it appears that at a time when very serious tensions are rising between the PA and militants in northern West Bank, and the consequence is obviously terrible, because, of course, it gives the impression that the PA and Israel have the same enemy, which is the Palestinian resistance. And so it ends and it kills the very low credibility that the PA still has today with its population, since it puts the PA and the occupation forces on the same side. Secondly, the PA develops the same repressive methods against journalists, as Barrett said before. And once again, it is something that we are used to see. We see on the Israeli side. Some people explain that the PA repression of Palestinian movements by its will to demonstrate to the Americans and to the Israeli its supposed ability to administer Gaza, which is, in my opinion, both cynical and a naive calculation. The thing is that the unity of the Palestinian national movement is essential and crucial, and Israel will continue to do everything in its power to prevent it. And of course, the fact that Palestinians arrest, brutalize, or even shoot to death other Palestinians is a terrible thing for the whole Palestinian struggle itself. And I would say, on a wider perspective, on the question of human rights, I think there is a big issue behind the idea that the Palestinian flag can be the flag of, I would say, universal human rights and justice. And you know, the West has always claimed to be the only legitimate representative of this idea. And I think today Gaza is a turning point, because it has demonstrated that it is simply false. The double standard with which the major Western capitals treated the Gaza issue is crystal clear. And today, I really believe that the international movement for Palestine has a huge role to play in making the Palestinian flag the symbol of the struggle for equality and justice all over the world. And considering that, of course, the Palestinian actors themselves must be exemplary in their own respect for human rights in their legitimate struggle for liberation. And in that perspective, also the repression in the West Bank is for sure and obviously very bad. And that is just something we don't need right now as we watch the collapse of humanity for 15 months in Gaza.
Mr. Benashur, thank you for your comment. And now, because we need to have everybody finish their comments at the beginning, and now we can have Mr. Aidan White, founder of Ethical Journalism Network. Mr. White, are you there? Can you just unmute? Mr. White?
Yes, thanks very much indeed. That's okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Look, thanks very much for the invitation to take part. I mean, I just want to focus on the issues related to journalism and free speech, and I don't disagree with a lot of what's been said, but I think that the damage that is being done to notions of democracy, justice, and human rights is not just damage being done in Israel and the Middle East. It's being damaged that's having a global effect. And the fact of the matter is that the latest events in the West Bank are a shocking reminder to journalists that independent reporting of this conflict, truth-telling about what's really going on, has in fact, both in Gaza and now the West Bank, been effectively outlawed, first by Israel and now by the Palestinian Authority. The action of the Palestinian Authority, and this picks up a point that's just been made by Malik, it seems to me smacks of desperation. It's a desperate attempt in the few days that are left before the Trump administration takes over to try to claim some legitimate ground to play a part in the administration of Gaza in the post-war phase that we're in. And I think that this is a fool's paradise in which the PA find themselves. Israel have effectively ruled this out of order, and there's no sort of question that that will happen. But what they have done and the damage that they have done by targeting media and tragically by adding to the long list of journalists who've been killed over the past months, will do terrible damage to everyone. And it's clear that the fact that Al Jazeera has paid a terrible price for its attempts to report professionally and independently. You've got to remember, Al Jazeera is the only international network that has reported extensively, exhaustively, and painstakingly about this conflict from the very beginning, and has paid a terrible price with the loss of its own people who've been targeted and killed by the Israeli forces. And the fact that Al Jazeera have been once again targeted is no surprise at all. It's happened without any evidence at all of the incitement that they're supposed to have taken part in. This is a simple and straightforward prejudice against a group of journalists who are trying to tell the truth and trying to tell the world the whole story about what has been going on. So far, we all know around 150 journalists have been killed since this conflict began. Many of them have been specifically targeted and assassinated in a very brutal way. Already, we have a number of specific actions being taken to the international courts, which in detail give evidence of how Israel has committed war crimes and broken international humanitarian law. And the fact that it's happening with the Palestinian Authority, I find particularly sad. I've been to the region many times in the last 30 years representing journalists. I've dealt with PA leaderships many times on the issues of the rights of journalists and the freedom of media. And they have consistently time and again reinforced their commitment to democratic values, to free speech, free expression, the right of journalists to work freely. And in just a few days, they have completely destroyed that tradition of attachment to democracy and the values of free speech. All of this is bad enough. All of these losses are bad enough. But the silence of the international community, the silence of the international democratic community, and particularly as Israel's allies in the face of all of these attacks on the lives of journalists, their families, on democracy and the rule of law, and on free speech, is absolutely appalling. When the world's democracies say nothing and stand aside, it appears that attacking journalists, targeting independent media, ignoring international law can be done with impunity. So it's no wonder, actually, that the PA feel they have the freedom to suspend their traditional attachment to democratic values and try to use this poisonous atmosphere to their own political advantage. Naive? It is. Futile? It is. But it comes at a terrible price, because in the process, unfortunately, they're not just sacrificing hopes for a truly democratic future for Palestine and its media community. They are dealing a severe and damaging blow to the international regime of respect for democracy and international law and human rights. So the question comes up, where do we go from here? Where we go from here, it seems to me, is to recognize that there is a massive political struggle that must be fought, not just in the Middle East, but much more in Washington, in London, in Paris, in the capital cities of the Western democratic world, to get them back on track, to get them to recognize what losses are being sustained for the future of democracy at this moment. And above all, to commit again to the notion that freedom of the press, free speech, the right of journalists to do their work without intimidation and without threats is absolutely a fundamental part of the future. And it must be a future for all of us. And above all, it must be the future for Palestine and the Palestinian people as well.
Mr. White, thank you very much. And we move on now to Dr. Mehmet Çelik, editorial coordinator at the Turkish Daily Sabah. Dr. Çelik.
Good evening, and first of all, I want to thank the Arab Organization for Human Rights to have me, and it's a privilege to be among such distinguished speakers. I mean, I can only echo what has been just said, and I mean, it would be hard to add more. And also, I mean, I agree with every single letter that was just pronounced by the previous speakers. But just to add a couple comments, first of all, I mean, when the war in Gaza started, or over the past 7 years of occupation, there's one thing that we usually complain about, and that is the mainstream Western media's handling this issue in the occupied territories. But now that there is alternative voices that are covering the occupation, the oppression, and the genocide taking place in Gaza and all other violence in the occupied territories, an entity, an establishment that is supposedly representing the Palestinians is silencing the alternative voice, the alternative media coverage, the alternative narrative that has been shared with the rest of the world. I think this is a huge problem, huge block for the Palestinian struggle itself. Secondly, I think if we're talking about legitimacy of the PA, first of all, I think there is a huge crisis of legitimacy, and this crisis is not something new. It is something that has been going on for many years, before even the Gaza war or the Gaza genocide started. In the eyes of Palestinians and in the eyes of, I think, those who follow the Palestinian struggle for many decades. But secondly, this crisis of legitimacy is also legitimizing, in a way, what Israel is doing at the moment. I mean, how are they not adding to what Israel is, what Israel calls a legitimate war or a legitimate action against the Palestinians? How is this the difference? When Israel is raiding West Bank, and at the same time, PA is raiding Palestinians. When Israel said they will deprive the Gazans of electricity and water and all the basic needs, but at the same time, we see that the PA is doing the same thing in Jenin. When Israel is attacking and killing journalists that who are covering the truth and what is happening in Gaza and elsewhere in the occupied territories, we're criticizing that and we are condemning that and we are calling that out. But the PA is doing the same thing. So the big question for me is, what is the legitimacy of the PA if they're doing the same thing as the Israelis? How are they able to recover that damage? How will they ever be able to recover that damage that they have done to the legitimacy of an establishment that is supposedly representing the Palestinian struggle in the occupied territories? So I think there is a huge dent that this is making in the press freedom, and when it comes to the covering the truth on the occupied territories. There is a huge blow to legitimacy of Palestinians in the West Bank that are run by the PA. I mean, this is a crisis of legitimacy, but it doesn't stop there. It's also adding to the attempt to legitimize the occupation, the genocide taking place elsewhere in the occupied territories. I just don't want to talk about how inhumane some of the raids and depriving them of basic needs, as the previous speakers have said, or talk about how the occupation and the colonial settler approach to this issue needs to be handled. But I think there's two questions for me just to end. One is that the alternative voices, be it the Al Jazeera, TRTs, or other individual journalists doing their own work, that the international community and those who care about the Palestinian struggle must support these voices and this alternative narration. At the same time, I think it is time for unity, or for that leadership that Jim spoke earlier when it comes to Palestinian unity and who will be leading this, because clearly it is not PA and that legitimacy is not there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Çelik, for your input. And now we move on to Mr. Bill Law, editor of Arab Digest. Mr. Law? Mr. Law, can you hear me?
Okay, there we go. Thank you. Hello. Well, first of all, I want to thank AOHR for inviting me to this panel, and it is an honor to be on the panel with such distinguished colleagues. Like those who preceded me, I agree with everything that has been said, and I think that this latest chapter of what the PA has done, is doing in Jenin, is part of a very long journey it has taken in collaborating with the IDF, with the Israelis in the colonization of the West Bank. I think it's true that the leadership of the PA has this fantasy that somehow if they can appeal to the Israelis and to Donald Trump, that they would emerge as winners in Gaza. This is clearly a pipe dream. It's a fallacy. I think that the killing of journalists and the young journalist Shatta al-Sabah being killed, it appears, by the Palestinian Authority is an act in itself of appalling cruelty. And as previous speakers have said, that the PA has become, has fallen to that level of depravity, really, underlines just how far and how deep the rot of the PA has gone. My Palestinian friends who live in the West Bank, they're not political. They struggle with their day-to-day lives, and they have complete contempt for the Palestinian Authority, but they dare not voice it. So we are in this situation where the Israelis have very effectively insinuated themselves into and created this police force that carries out their settler colonization program. But then after all, when you pull back from that, we too are collaborators because, and I speak as a journalist here. I look at, I'm a former BBC journalist for many years, and I look at the BBC and I look at the New York Times and the Washington Post, and I think, the bias towards Israel is so strong. And the fact that I believe the number of journalists killed, correct me if I'm wrong, is over 200. And, we often just have these numbers, but just for one moment, if you may indulge me, I want to read something that was written in August of last year. I don't know if I'll write to you again. I keep what I've written and I'm writing. Maybe it will come to light one day. I refuse a cheap death. I curse the murderer. And that was the poet and journalist Mohammed Hijazi. 4 days ago, on the 5th of January, he, along with 89 others, was killed in an Israeli air attack on Jabalia refugee camp. On 3rd of January, the photojournalist Omar al-Darawi was killed in an Israeli strike that hit his family home in Al-Zaweda. 26th of December, 5 journalists were killed when the IDF hit a clearly marked press van doing a live broadcast. I want to name those journalists because I want to go beyond numbers. Ibrahim al-Sheikh Ali, Faisal Abu Qassam, Muhammad al-Adda, Ayman Abd al-Rahman Jadi, and Fadi Ramadan Hasuna. Look, I could spend the rest of my short time trying to name all of those journalists who have been killed by the Israelis. I'm glad that Shireen Abu Akleh was mentioned. She was assassinated. The person that killed her has received no punishment whatsoever. The Israelis have a plan. It is to silence those who want to speak truth to power, who want to speak of the genocide. I applaud the comments about Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera has shown enormous courage and damn fine journalism as well in telling the story of what is happening, and the shuttering of their bureau in Ramallah and the harassment that the PA is using against them is appalling. But again, I want to point the finger back at the West and Western journalists and challenge Western journalists to stand up for their colleagues who are dying. I mean, this is extraordinary. The number of journalists who have died in this conflict is unprecedented. So, yeah, I think that what does the future bring? I honestly don't know. And I think that everyone's wondering, what will Donald Trump do? Does Donald Trump care about journalists? No. Donald Trump is going to go after the journalists in his own country. And one other point, if I may, is Haaretz, which is really a newspaper of note that does, again, damn good journalism, is being harassed by the Netanyahu government. They've pulled all their advertising revenue from Haaretz. They've told their people, government, not to speak to Haaretz. They are trying to bring Haaretz down. That would be a huge loss as well. I think there are many fine columnists who write for Haaretz, and they too are speaking truth to power. But we live in very perilous and dangerous times, and it's terribly dangerous for the journalists who are trying to describe those times. And I would like for we in the West to be showing much more solidarity, much more support, and speaking up much more about what is happening right now in the West Bank, in Gaza, and indeed, in Lebanon as well. If I'm being truthful, throughout the Middle East, so many journalists are in jail in the Middle East, and no one's speaking up for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Law, for your points of press freedom in the West Bank. and of course all over Gaza and West Bank, but especially we are focusing today more on West Bank. Thank you very much. And now we give the floor to Mr. Buka Nilisa Omole, Kenyan political activist. Mr. Omole.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me, the Arab Organization for Human Rights in the United Kingdom. It's a pleasure to represent my country and to represent Africa, and also to speak in this forum on behalf of Kenya Palestine Solidarity Movement. And secondly, also I want to congratulate Al Jazeera for making sure that the African continent receives news factually and in real time from the occupied Palestinian territory. This is a privilege to the people of the African continent, because most of the international corporate media only do an analysis to spread lies against the Palestinian people. So we are privileged to have, Al Jazeera doing the most important work to bring the alternative news to the people of the global south. Congratulations. Now, the third thing is that we see a lot of similarities between the struggle of the African continent during colonization and the struggle for the Palestinian liberation. I would like to take this chance to try to draw some parallels about what now we see happening in West Bank and what has happened in the African continent. We know that the entire Palestinian is now an occupied territory. It's important to note that. And we are dealing with settler colonialism. We are dealing with Zionism. Now, when we talk about the Palestinian Authority, in whose authority does the PA act? It's important to ask that question. And who created PA? Who welcomes PA? Who gives legitimacy to Palestinian Authority in the international affairs? It's important to understand this. Then the rest of the things can be understood in the context that those are just the outcomes. Because during the fight for independence in the African continent, there are other organizations that, pursued the PA line of trying to make compromises with the settler colonizers, to try to negotiate with imperialism, to try and negotiate with the people who are exploiting others. This is important. So the Palestinian Authority does not have legitimacy and popular support from the Palestinians themselves, because it was also a creation of United States and the Zionist entity Israel. It's important to note that, because what is remaining after Oslo Accord, and I really appreciate that Boy Barrett had actually brought out the Oslo Accord, because after the Oslo Accord, the path to the Palestinian statehood was meant to take clearly the 1967, border agreements. But what happened after that? We can see that the Palestinian Authority, even though they claim to control West Bank, the people who wield the real power in West Bank is the Zionist entity Israel and not the Palestinian Authority. How many times have we seen that the Jenin refugee camp has been attacked by the Israeli Zionist regime against the PA? So indeed, the PA does not have any real power. So if we expect the PA to protect journalism, then we are expecting settler colonialism or a partner in the occupation to actually support liberation of that territory. So to expect the Palestinian Authority to actually, respect the law and defend, the right of the Al Jazeera to exist within the occupied Palestinian territory, I think to us we're expecting actually too much. After all, the leader Abbas is ruling. Where does he get his legitimacy from? There has never been elections for the last, I think, 17 years, if I remember. And when they attempted to do an election in Gaza, they were defeated by Hamas. So where does the PA get its legitimacy? Even if the United States dominance class parrot about democracy, but we could ask them, where does the PA get its legitimacy? It gets its legitimacy from imperialism and the Zionist entity, and not from the Palestinian people. So we don't expect anything anywhere to actually support the PA. In fact, they have been supporting this, the two-state solution for a long time. We have seen the Palestinian Authority, even after the Zionist entity expanded their territory beyond east of Jerusalem, and even in the city, between east and Jerusalem and beyond the roads of West Bank, there is still complacency. So in our own analysis is that there are two struggles that are happening in the occupied Palestinian territory. There are the Palestinian resistance that have taken the correct line, and the correct line is Hamas. The correct line is the entire resistant movement. And then there is the PA, who are actually puppets of the Zionist entity that want to make compromises to actually advance the interest of the Israel Zionist entity. This is important for us to actually bring out. Now, on journalism, really, there is also yellow journalism, but also there is also journalism. But in a clear question where there is a settler colonialism, in a clear question where there is the land grabber and the landless people, in a clear question where there is the murderer and the murdered, like in the Palestinian case, then the journalist must be on the side of the oppressed people. There can never be objectivity when dealing with a powerful Zionist entity supported by one of the powerful forces, the United States, that is actually carrying out a genocide on a daily basis, killing innocent people. How is it possible for journalism not to be biased in the support of the oppressed people? So if we talk about objectivity of journalism, I think it's important to make sure that at least at this moment, the objectivity of journalism is to be in solidarity with the Palestinian people and not the occupation. And then finally, also, the issue of international law. There is no international law. The United States had hijacked everything that gives us any international law. Look at the way they veto everything in the United Nations. If we expect the international law to protect Al Jazeera establishment in West Bank, it is also expecting too much, because the United States that actually finances this genocide and occupation is fairly complicit with the death of the Palestinian people. So we don't expect the international law to take place. Even Netanyahu, the butcher of the Palestinian people, is actually indicted in the ICC. Why is he not in jail if the international law was really working? So it is an open fight about imperialism and anti-imperialism. And in our correct analysis, we think that imperialism will be buried in Gaza. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Booker. And trying to bring from your words to post a question to Mr. Richard Boyd Barrett about Al Jazeera closure. Mr. Barrett, are you there?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah,
Richard, I'm sorry, I should have my
Richard. Okay,
it's Richard.
Okay, Richard, and now we will start our discussion by posing some questions. And first question is for you, Richard, and of course for everybody else to comment. The question is, whose interests are advanced by closure of Al Jazeera in Palestine? I mean, how do you assess the implications of this action on press freedom and the public's fundamental right to access accurate information?
Well, the only people who benefit from the censorship being directed against Al Jazeera or against journalists generally are the occupation, and the occupation's sponsors, Western sponsors, who have an interest in hiding the truth about the occupation, about the apartheid nature of the regime, about the illegal settlements, about the annexation of territory, about the genocide. The only people who have an interest in suppressing the truth about these things are the occupying forces and their Western sponsors, who are rocked. And, you know, to try and sound one note of optimism in this pretty bleak scenario, I think the occupation and their Western sponsors in the United States, in Europe, and so on, have been genuinely rocked by the scale of popular solidarity with the Palestinian people, with the people of Gaza over the last year. I think they are worried about it. And there is no doubt that Al Jazeera has played a very, very particular role, as Booker and others have alluded to, in filling out the truth, the story, you know, the truth telling about what has been happening to the Palestinian people. It has put enormous pressure on a media that hitherto was very, very biased in favor of Israel and very reluctant or outright refused to really tell the truth about the plight of the Palestinians and about the nature of the Israeli regime. And Al Jazeera, among others, but Al Jazeera undoubtedly is the most significant and notable of the media outlets that have, actually begun to expand the picture to tell the truth. And that has put pressure on Western governments who have wanted to lie to the world about the nature of what Israel is and what it's been doing to the Palestinian people. So they're the only people who have an interest. And so for the Palestinian Authority to sink to this level is shocking and terrible, but it is also ultimately self-defeating, as I think a few of the speakers have alluded to. Because once you go down the road of suppressing the truth tellers, it's going to come back and haunt every single Palestinian. Ultimately, it'll probably come back and haunt the PLO themselves.
It will backfire on.
It'll backfire on them, exactly. So it is a terrible mistake at every level. It's tragic. I think, as has been said, we have to keep telling the truth. And we, as Bill Law, I think was the one who said, or somebody else said, we have a particular responsibility to be, in this situation of censorship and suppression of the truth and the truth tellers, we have a particular responsibility to keep telling the truth and exposing this, particularly in the Western countries, and to challenge the governments that continue to support this brutal oppression and suppression of truth in Palestine.
Thank you, Richard, and for our speakers for today as well. The same question and the same topic. Do you think in whose interest what happened to Al Jazeera or suppression of press in the West Bank, which Al Jazeera, as you say, that presents a lot and suffered a lot in Gaza. So, what do you think? It's whose interest? Who has the real benefit from closure of Al Jazeera?
I'm happy to weigh in, Sheriff, if I could.
Please, Jim, go ahead.
I would like to think that the idealism of the previous speaker is well founded. I'm not sure it is. I mean, it took the Irish over 200 years to undo, well, hundreds of years, more than that, to undo the damage that Oliver Cromwell exacted on that island. I'm not sure that justice is actually served. Having spent a quarter of a century in the U.S. Congress and been in politics pretty much my entire adult life, I'm not sure that the arc of history bends toward justice. But putting that aside, who ultimately benefits? Obviously, the current Israeli government benefits. The right-wing settler movement benefits by what's happening in the West Bank and Gaza. the Palestinian Authority, I do not think, benefits by what they're allowing their military to do. But beyond that, the Western money and media that supports Israel, particularly in the United States, benefits. Because right now they control the narrative. I don't know if you're aware of this, but for the last several years, there's been an effort on the part of AIPAC and related Israeli lobbying organizations to shut down Al Jazeera in the United States. They've been partially successful. There's a current effort underway to prevent Al Jazeera from being able to report what goes on in the Congress. They want to take away their press privileges to report on the U.S. Congress. They may succeed this year. They want Al Jazeera to have to report as a foreign agent, comparable to Russia and Chinese media. So this is an ongoing struggle, and it extends beyond the West Bank. If the American people could see Al Jazeera in the same way that they see what happens through their Fox News medium, I don't think they would support the 95% of the U.S. Congress that's bought by the lobby that funds their campaigns. It's not in the interests of the American media, particularly. I won't speak of European media, to allow the truth to be exposed as to the genocide in Gaza, the suppression of human rights, and as we say, journalism in the West Bank. They don't want this discussed, and so far they've been pretty successful. I mean, when the destruction of Gaza was taking place, the principal issue that was raised in the U.S. Congress was alleged anti-Semitism on U.S. campuses, university campuses. They blamed Qatar for funding several universities, which are actually located in Doha. And many of the protests were led by well-educated, fairly liberal Jewish students, not Palestinians, and Jewish professors. And yet the narrative was anti-Semitism on campuses. And you heard more about that than the destruction of life and infrastructure in Gaza. So this extends beyond what's happening in the West Bank. Al Jazeera is a threat. It's even a threat to some Arab countries, frankly, who don't want democracy, who are resentful of what Al Jazeera reports because they can't control it. And frankly, as long as Al Jazeera exists, there is some hope for democracy, justice, and human rights. But I'm not confident that it's going to exist in the places where we need it, such as in Palestine today.
Yeah, if I could just come in there briefly.
Mr. White, yes, you have the floor, and then Mr. Chilik wants to.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to make one brief point, which is I think that the people who benefit are not just in the Middle East. There is a global concern and anxiety about the notion of truth-telling as a whole. We live in what is called a post-truth era. And we're seeing the idea of truth-telling itself being called into question. In the last few days, we've seen Mark Zuckerberg announce changes to Meta's approach to fact-checking and to the question of what he defines as censorship, and which most decent Democrats would define as a restoration of values in the way we have public communications. Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg are very much on the same plane. And they represent a view about information and veracity in public life, which should be of deep concern to anyone who believes in free speech and democracy and pluralism. And I believe profoundly that this problem will get worse with the presidency of Donald Trump. So if we're looking for who benefits, what does this play into? It plays into a new world information order in which truth, justice, and the right of people to express themselves is being called into question. And I'm called into question by corporate and political centers of power. And I think that opens up a new debate, a new discussion, which is really very important to all of us.
Thank you very much, Aydin. And Mr. Chilik, you had something to add?
Well, just to just add to pose the question.
Check your time.
Yeah, just to pose the question. On the other hand, from the other side, who does this not benefit to? Indeed, it doesn't benefit in the international community those who want to see the truth about what is taking place in the occupied territories as a whole. Let alone, it doesn't benefit those fathers and mothers that pull their children from under the rubble. It doesn't benefit those children who see their fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters being killed in the occupied territories as a whole, not just in Gaza. It doesn't benefit those the descendants of those who left their homes with a key in their hand and now they're refugees elsewhere around the world. It doesn't benefit every single citizen of the world that wants to see the real picture on the ground. And I don't care who it benefits at this point, because it is clear who this benefits, but it doesn't clearly benefit those that claim to be standing for the rights and the freedoms of Palestinians, and their claim is diminished with this action. The closure of Al Jazeera will, as I believe it was Richard that said, will be backfiring. I mean, if you're a puppet in the hands of a colonial settler regime, then that will come back to you as well.
Maybe I could add one more.
That's right. Booker, you have something to add?
Yeah, maybe just
shortly. Okay.
Yes, Nadir, thank you very much. What I wanted to say is that this incident has only confirmed that Al Jazeera indeed provides legitimate, truthful news. So it's going to bring more legitimacy for Al Jazeera, particularly in the African continent, that had suffered in the hands of the global North manipulation of news. And it actually confirms that one of the alternatives, counterpunch for the dominance of news, only one-sided narrative that has been promoted to subjugate particularly the oppressed people, will then come to an end. Now, the second point and the last one is that this is not a defeat. It is only one step backward. But indeed, the resistance shall succeed, because we have confirmed in history that the success is with the oppressed people and not the oppressor. So the resistance of the Palestinian people to their true liberation shall surely even advance. Like we have seen in Kenya in the last 1 year, the solidarity with the Palestinian project has been very overwhelming for us.
Thanks, Booker. Thank you very much. And somebody else wants to add something? Any comments?
Yes, maybe.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Law, and then Mr. Malik Malashur.
I feel Mr. Malik got in ahead of me, so I'm happy to cede to him.
Okay, it's the same. Okay, Mr. Malashur.
I will be very short. By the way,
go ahead. Take your time.
Thank you. I totally agree with what Aydin said just before, and I think it it comes back to what I said a few minutes ago. Palestine is the world in miniature. It resumes, I think, the situation of the world as it is today. You ask, who is winning there? This is global. This is a fight, a struggle between the forces that wants the destruction of the centrality of truth, the centrality of freedom of speech, the freedom of speaking the truth, the destruction of institution of international justice. I was shocked by the way the American Congress has voted a bill, I think it was early June 24, threatening the prosecutor of the International Court of Justice if this warrant was released on Netanyahu's head. It's a direct attack on institution of international justice, and this is Palestine is about that. It's about cultural hegemony, as Gramsci used to say. Israel is not the symbol of the struggle for cultural hegemony, and this is a struggle between the forces of destruction of the world as we know it, and the ones, as I think I am, who struggle for justice, equality, and those universal values that we herited from French Revolution.
Okay, thanks very much, Law. On the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I just wanted to underline the point about who wins from this, and really, if you look at the Gulf states in particular, and Egypt, these authoritarian regimes who have silenced any form of critical journalism. We shouldn't forget that when Qatar was blockaded in 2017, the target was Al Jazeera, and the target, I believe, for these countries remains Al Jazeera. Why? Because Al Jazeera presents a threat to them. So I think that what previous colleagues have said on this panel in defense of Al Jazeera is very, very important. But I also want to put my oar in the water for Haaretz. Haaretz is under serious strain. It is important that those Israelis who support Palestinians, and I have Israeli friends who do, that they get the truth as well. And Haaretz is just about the only place where they can get it. So that's the point I wanted to make. Let us stand with Al Jazeera. Let us also consider support for Haaretz. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a good point to make, especially the press all over the area is suffering from so many troubles, not only Al Jazeera. And there someone else wants to add to this point, or we can move to the point of not only human rights. I mean, what can be done? Something related to the future. What can be done towards what's happening in the West Bank, of course, in Gaza as well, and in the West Bank regarding the siege of Jenin?
Well, I wonder if I can just say on the question of the future for human rights, I agree with Booker that the idea of an international order which defends, promotes, and successfully protects human rights, it's not there now. It is an ambition and an aspiration and a long-term dream. That's been revealed very starkly. But I do believe that the attachment we have to human rights is an absolutely essential part of building a future for humanity. Because if we abandon and we consign to some sort of notion of history the idea that there could be an international human rights regime which was meaningful, then I think that that itself would be a terrible statement of failure. So I believe this is a political struggle. It's a political struggle in which we have to fight for governments to stand up for these rights and to compete and to demand that these rights are protected. I'm Irish, like so many members of this panel, and the fact of the matter is I'm proud to hold an Irish passport as a result of finding that Ireland, like Spain, was among the few countries willing to attach themselves to the action against the Israeli state over the imposition of apartheid in the West Bank. And that is an important way in which governments politically can demonstrate their attachment to an international rule of law. So I think we have to fight for human rights. We have to gather evidence. We have to hold to account the Israeli state and their military leaders. And we have to present to the international community and international courts cases that have to be followed up. It's absolutely essential that we do that, because if we don't do that, then I think we will be, unfortunately, moving towards a descent into a world of division, hostility and conflict, the like of which we've never seen before. So I think it's really important that human rights at this moment are defended stronger than ever, and that we don't abandon them as being a mechanism for the development of human society for the future. I think that would be a terrible thing to do.
Thank you very much, Aidan. And before raising your hand, Mr. Jim, who is first, Mr. Jim Moran or Richard? Okay,
Jim, you go ahead. Jim, you go ahead.
Okay, because we just need to have the final words for each speaker, and also we want to stress on this final word, the steps, what should be done by the donor countries to take, an action against Palestinian Authority, and something like aid or something like the press freedom, what's happening, and how can countries and regional media hold the Palestinian Authority accountable while highlighting the humanitarian crisis in Jenin. Let's have a final word from each one, and please, if you can stress or like to focus on this point. Please, Mr. Richard, you can go ahead, or Mr. Moran.
Well, Richard, it's up to you. Please. You want me to speak? Okay.
Go ahead.
Can you go first? I'll go after you.
I can't see the rest of the group, so I can't read body language. But please, let me say something as candidly as I can. I may never see the group of you or your audience again, so I need to share something with you, and I do know of what I speak. So the problem is the United States. It's the United States, even though it's 5% of the world's population. We have the largest military. We have the strongest economy. And we are the ones who fund, who arm, and who give political cover to Israel. Whatever the Israeli government does, we're there to back them up. They could not exist, frankly, if it was not for American aid, for the American military assistance, and for the international political support that the United States gives them. So, you're speaking from other countries, and I'm glad that you are. And most of those countries have spoken up at the United Nations, but it hasn't mattered because one country has dominated that with our money and our influence and whatever. So how do we change this dynamic? The Israeli lobby controls the Congress. The U.S. Congress will do what the lobby instructs them to do because they contribute the most money to campaigns. And if you vote against them, as I have, they will run people against you. And in most cases, certainly in the last election, they win. So if a member of Congress wants to stay representing their people, then they have to do whatever the Israeli lobby tells them to do. The Israeli lobby will support Israel for better or for worse. Right now, it's for worse, frankly. The Israeli government has to be changed. That's what has to be changed. The change is going to have to come from within the Israeli government. The problem is that if you ask, and some of my panelists have probably experienced this, most Israelis are not seeing the reality of what's happening on the other side of the fence. In other words, in Gaza. It's almost like that movie that came out about what was happening in Germany. And just on the other side of a garden wall, people were being massacred, were being gassed, and yet they didn't know. Well, most of the Israeli population really doesn't know what's going on. And Haaretz, and I'm glad this has been underscored, Haaretz is one source of the truth. You've got good authors. Not all of them agree, but most of them present the facts as they see them. And that's why they are a threat as well as Al Jazeera to Mr. Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, Smotrich, etc. That government is going to have to change. When that government changes, then the Israeli lobby will change, support a different government. I don't see any other way out of it, because as long as the U.S. is fourscore and in support of whatever this Israeli government does, this kind of destruction is going to continue. And I think what could happen under the Trump administration is that you'll have an extension of the Abraham Accord, which is all about the economics. You'll have Saudi Arabia, certainly the Emirates. The Emirates have backed up whatever Israel has been wanting to do for a number of reasons, and other authoritarian governments. So this is a struggle that goes way beyond what's actually happening in Palestine and in Israel. It's a struggle for democracy, for human rights, and for the truth being accessible to populations around the world. And right now, Al Jazeera stands out as a source of truth and journalism ethics. Haaretz does too, and that's why they're being targeted. So I thank you for this panel. I thank you for being including me. But I'm not sure that as much passion as my fellow panelists put into this, that it's going to make a difference unless we go after the sources of power, which is the money and the media.
Exactly.
Thank you.
We have to treat the disease from that roots, right? Okay, and now we give the floor to our final word from Richard.
Nader, well, you asked the most difficult question last, which in a way we could spend the whole...
Oh, so we can just sum up with it.
Exactly. And I think, to be honest, the answer to your question is going to take a lot more than the time we have this evening. So it maybe poses other questions about things that we need to discuss further. But I would only say this, is that I want to restate something I said, and Booker, I think, strongly agreed with me in his comments about Kenya and the massive advance of the popular solidarity with Palestine that has taken place over the last year. I mean, of course, we all know how bleak and terrible and horrific the situation is in Gaza, what a low ebb it is to see the Palestinian Authority attack journalists, to attack Jenin, and there are many, many reasons to be pessimistic. But I do think we need to recognize that it is precisely because of the success of the truth-telling by organizations and outlets like Al Jazeera, and most importantly, because of the heroic ongoing resistance of the Palestinian people themselves, that popular knowledge and awareness and solidarity with the people of Palestine has reached unprecedented levels across the globe. I can tell you, in Ireland, we've always had a high level of solidarity with Palestine, but it has reached new heights in the last year or so. There are people who didn't know anything about Palestine are now wearing Palestinian badges. are learning about the Nakba, are learning about apartheid. They are drawing just basic human conclusions about the horror of what Israel is doing to the Palestinian people.
Exactly.
So,
yes.
just to my mind, even when we're talking about the Irish government's actions in joining the ICJ action, that was forced on the Irish government. They were resistant to this. 1 year ago, I put a motion to the Irish Parliament calling for the Irish government to take action at the ICC and the ICJ. They voted against it. But now they're doing it. In fact, I only got 5 votes in the Parliament on the first motion that I put on this. Then we got 55 votes, and then the government did it about 7 or 8 months later. That is down to the level of popular mobilization of ordinary people insisting on human rights, on decency, on opposing apartheid, opposing genocide. So, I mean, there's a lot of detail to flesh out in what we have to do, but it is about appealing to the grassroots, ordinary people to tell them the truth and to put pressure on them. And when we see journalists, for example, globally, taking action as they have been over the last while, saying, as Aidan has intimated, that this is an attack on the free speech of everybody, not just on the journalists in Al Jazeera or in Palestine. This is the sort of action we need. Or when we see health workers across the globe taking action about the vicious assaults on the health service in Gaza, this is the way that we spread that movement that can put unbearable pressure on Western governments that continue to give impunity to Israel.
Thank you very much, Richard, and the rest of our guests today. If they have, since Richard and Mr. Moran have already spoken, if you have a final word, a final message, a final comment on what we had discussed today, just for wrap up. So, still have Mr. Ben Ashur, Mr. White, and Mr. Chilek, Mr. Billah. Do you have any final word? Mr. Chilek, please go ahead.
I agree with Richard on his comment about
less than 1 minute.
Yeah, about the awareness at the global level. I think even if we talk about individuals without any political affiliation that see the picture in Gaza and in the occupied territories, and they go ahead and boycott, for example, I think even that has been very significant and very strong, let alone other actions that they take to raise awareness and to stand against that oppressive genocide taking place in Gaza. Thank you.
Thank you. And as well, Mr. Bukanigisa Omole, your final word, Mr. Aidan White.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank all the panel. It's been an absolute privilege. I've really enjoyed listening to everyone, and I'm really quite inspired by it. I mean, I think very, very simply, we have to continue doing more of what we're already doing. Use our networks everywhere we work, the organizations we're working with at local, regional, international level, get the message out. This is the time to build support for human rights, support journalists and independent media, and do everything we can to get governments back on track. And that means supporting democracy, human rights, and the Palestinian people in their current struggle. I mean, I think this is just the beginning of a long and difficult struggle. And the sooner we recharge our batteries and get into it in 2025, so much the better. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's right. And we move to Mr. Billah for the final word.
Yeah, again, thank you so much, and I too have learned so much and enjoyed the conversations. And they're difficult ones. I think that the point that's been made and needs to be, I think, reiterated is that as with the Palestinian people who've shown enormous resilience, they have not given up. And so I think that we need to take sustenance from that. And really, we're all Palestinians in that struggle. it's a very important struggle, and we need to resist. We need to fight. We're heading into very, very dangerous times, very difficult times, and it's important that we take our positions and speak out forcefully. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. And Mr. Benashur.
Yes, thank you. It was a privilege to listen to all of you guys. And once again, I'm very sorry for the poor level of my English.
That's excellent.
Thank you. My final word is this one. What is at stake is a global battle between the rule of law, between the idea that principle and the rules are the same for everybody, whatever the color of your skin, whatever your religion, whatever the place on the world where you live. And on the other side, the rule of the strongest. This is what is at stake. And we know that on January 20, we can, we can open new gates on a new world that we don't know nothing about. Maybe it can be, brutal and dangerous. So this is a global struggle. It means something that you can see Palestinian flag in Santiago, in Tokyo, in Washington, in Nairobi. Everybody, everywhere in the world, you can see this Palestinian flag. And once again, this flag is symbol of equality and global justice. I think that's why we have to fight for it.
Thank you very much, Malik. And with the final word of Booker. Booker, you have the final word.
Thank you. First of all, I appreciate my panelists and the learning that has taken place to advance the Palestinian cause. The second point I would like to make is that Zionism is not invisible anymore. It has exposed its own weaknesses. There is optimism, at least in the last 10 years that I've been in this movement, that the day for victory for the Palestinian people is coming sooner. And finally, that the declining United States empire, it's also a good thing for the Palestinian people and a peaceful world. So all we can do is to support the resistant axis and to stay in permanent and conditional solidarity with the Palestinian people and the objective media houses like Al Jazeera, who continues to highlight the plight of the Palestinian people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for this valuable contribution to this valuable webinar. And I would like to thank each and every one of you for your precious time, either by speaking or commenting or listening. And I hope we will meet again in some future webinars. And to all of you, thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks to all the panelists.
Nyakораmogi, angikoni, kena angikoni, loto, angikoni.
Tunafaa tuangalie, kwani Wakikuyu na Wajaluo hawaishi kwa amani? Karen na Runda si wanaishi kwa amani? Sasa hivi utapata wanakunywa whisky na wanachoma nyama pamoja, lakini sisi wanatumia kabila kutugawanya. So kabila yenye tuko nayo Kenya ni kabila ya matajiri na kabila ya maskini. Kwa hivyo sisi kabila ya maskini lazima tuungane na hii chama yetu tuijenge ili tuchukue uongozi.
And therefore, when they decided to join the enemy of the poor Kenyans, ambaye ni Ruto, ndio waweze kupata hela kidogo, wajenge nyumba kidogo huko, we decided to launch now another party.
Aren't we tired of talking about Raila, Ruto, and they're in the same class? They're rich, wako wapi? Tunaona. Sisi tunataka to discuss mambo yenye inatuumiza sisi kama wananchi. Let's talk about housing, food, shelter. Let's talk about medication, transportation, education. Hii mambo ya Raila, Ruto, Gachagua, wenyewe wako na tabaka yao. They're the rich class. Na sisi wananchi, mbona tusiongelee politics yenye inatuhusu sisi kama wananchi? Hatuna manyumba, kuna land grabbing, kuna evictions, kuna demolitions. Tunalala nje, hawa nalala kare. So it's high time we concentrate on us. Chama cha kikomunisti, Kenya, chama chenye tunaongelea mambo yanayohusu wananchi, walala hoi kwenye nchi. Asante.
We are here to come and tell Jacaranda people that in the next, whenever we call upon you to take political power in a way that we can discuss in detail, whether it is through the ballot or the bullet, you will be with us to take that political power. Ruto down.
Bunge viva. Comrade viva. Mimi nimefurahia sana na Communist Party Marxist Kenya. I think I'll be running on your ticket. I should be an MCA under your ticket.
Those who kill us when they are in power, those who murder young people when they are in power, those who steal money for medicine when they are in power while the poor continue to die. We are taking political power to arrest them, confiscate their wealth and jail them. That is the revenge.
So you realize that the school manager is more lethal in dealing with teachers than the populator, because he has no decision to make. Even his job is engaged. In the banking sector, also we have brokers like that. You have the owner of the bank and you have the bank manager. The bank manager is being paid bonuses out of the profits he makes. And then the bank owner gives him a target. That means I want 100 billion. If you make it, I will give you something small. Let us say I will give you 5%. So you do your work. Doing your work means making sure that the worker works longer hours and gets less pay. Because what is the proper definition of a good businessman? He buys things as low as possible and sells as higher, including labor. And Yanova's labor is also in the market, like any other articles of trade.
Sisi tuko na chama. Haya, leo tumeleta sasa chama yetu ya kutetea sisi watu wa tabaka la chini. Viva CPMK, viva! Viva CPMK, viva! Asanteni sana Githurai. Comrades, I want to mention the name of the 10 martyrs of Jenin uprising. Those people who were killed. Nikisema jina yao unasema shujaa. Tunaanza na Rex Masai. Rex Masai. Finally, is one young comrade that died less than 10 years of age, Peter Kamau. All that blood that has been shed here in Githurai rests in the hands of none other than William Samoei Ruto, the mother of young people. Thank you, comrade.
The unit and fight. Form the unit and fight.
That our organization in the country is fit to capture all revolutionary forces that will join hands with us to achieve the revolution in Kenya.
We are ready for socialism. We are ready. We are ready for socialism. We are ready.
Through the unity of workers and peasants, we will be able to liberate this country because we are fighting a neo-colonial state.
Na kuna kutawaliwa kubaya katika nchi kama kutawaliwa kimawazo. So tuanze kujikomboa kimawazo, alafu nami ya kujikomboa ama kupata ukombozi kamili ni kupitia mapinduzi.
Kwani Wakikuyu na Wajaluo hawaishi kwa amani Karen na Runda? Si wanaishi kwa amani? Sasa hii utapata wanakunywa whisky na wanachoma nyama pamoja. Lakini sisi wanatumia kabila kutugawanya. So kabila yenye tuko nayo Kenya ni kabila ya matajiri na kabila ya maskini. Kwa hivyo sisi kabila ya maskini lazima tuungane na hii chama yetu tuijenge ili tuchukue uongozi.
And therefore, when they decided to join the enemy of the poor Kenyans, ambaye ni Ruto, ndio waweze kupata hela kidogo, wajenge nyumba kidogo huko, we decided to launch now another party.
Aren't we tired of talking about Raila, Ruto, and they're in the same class? They're rich, wako wapi? Tunaona. Sisi tunataka to discuss mambo yenye inatuumiza sisi kama wananchi. Let's talk about housing, food, shelter. Let's talk about medication, transportation, education. Hii mambo ya Raila, Ruto, Gachagua, wenyewe wako na tabaka yao. They're the rich class. Na sisi wananchi, mbona tusiongelee politics yenye inatuhusu sisi kama wananchi? Hatuna manyumba, kuna land grabbing, kuna evictions, kuna demolitions. Tunalala nje, hawa wanalala kare. So it's high.
Tunafaa tuangalie, kwani Wakikuyu na Wajaluo hawaishi kwa amani Karen na Runda? Si wanaishi kwa amani? Sasa hii utapata wanakunywa whisky na wanachoma nyama pamoja. Lakini sisi wanatumia kabila kutugawanya. So kabila yenye tuko nayo Kenya ni kabila ya matajiri na kabila ya maskini. Kwa hivyo sisi kabila ya maskini lazima tuungane na hii chama yetu tuijenge ili tuchukue uongozi.
And therefore, when they decided to join the enemy of the poor Kenyans, ambaye ni Ruto, ndio waweze kupata hela kidogo, wajenge nyumba kidogo huko, we decided to launch now another party.
Download Glovo, order food, groceries, flowers, diapers, electronics, or anything you want, we'll deliver in minutes.
Tunaona. Sisi tunataka to discuss mambo yenye inatuumiza sisi.
Ambaye ni Ruto, ndio waweze kupata hela kidogo, wajenge nyumba kidogo huko. We decided to launch now another party.
Download Glovo, order food, groceries, flowers, diapers, electronics, or anything you want, we'll deliver in minutes.
Tunaona. Na sisi tunataka to discuss mambo yenye